So I've got some new, pretty exciting information to go over. I'm going to get into that later in the video. First, I'm going to just do some foundational stuff. So new people who come to see this video, they're not totally confused. So let me just get right into it. First, I'll describe this, what we call the 276 sign. This was a sign that occurred in the sun, moon, and stars December 27th going into the 28th. So just between Christmas and New Year's. And the sign is defined in the book of Acts, chapters 27 and 28, for the most part from 3 verses. If you recall, the book of Acts, chapters 27 and 28 are about Paul's ship voyage as he's being taken on a ship as a prisoner to Italy. So through the Mediterranean to Italy, to go to Rome to stand before Caesar. So let's look at those verses real fast. So the first verse is Acts 27:37. It says, "We were all in the ship, 276 souls." So it mentions this sort of random number, 276 there. And then Acts 27, verse 28. This is where they're checking the depth of the water. And they check and they find it 20 fathoms deep and then 15 fathoms deep. So that's 20 and 15. You add those together, you get 35. We'll explain what that means in a moment. And then in chapter 28, you've got in verse 11, and when they leave Malta, the island Malta, they leave it on the ship whose sign was Castor and Pollux. And what they mean there, of course, ostensibly is that it's got an engraving or a marking of Castor and Pollux. But this is a hint from God, like a double entendre of a sign in the sky. So whose sign was Castor and Pollux. And Castor and Pollux are the twin stars and that occur in the constellation Gemini. So this is referring to the constellation Gemini. So if you look at that in the sky, so what happened on those dates? The first part is Acts 27:37, where it mentions the 276 souls. What that's referring to is 276 degrees on the ecliptic. Okay, so that's ecliptic longitude measurement. The ecliptic is like if you're standing and you're looking at this in the night sky, the sun, moon, and planets all move along a line from right to left. So they're moving along this. They're not all over the place. They're all on a line. It's this imaginary line. That's the ecliptic. So it goes around you. If you're standing on Earth, it's going around you and going around the Earth. It's on the exact plane of the solar system. Now, the way we're looking at this here is we're not looking at we're kind of like a bird's eye view of it, So you can see the Mazzaroth, which is the Jewish constellation story of redemption, right? In these 12 constellations, that's what the Mazzaroth means. And since that's a circle, it's got 360 degrees. You can you can measure what point on the circle you are by degrees. So that's what we mean when we say 276 degrees of ecliptic longitude. Okay, so that's the first part of the sign defined in Acts 27:37. This 276 degrees of ecliptic longitude. So only on those 2 days was the sun at 276 degrees of ecliptic longitude. On December 27th and 28th. So it entered 276 degrees of ecliptic longitude depending on where you are in the world. If you were in the Americas, it entered it in the evening of the 27th. If you were in the Far East, it would have been early morning of the 28th. But it was those 2 days. And that happens to be in the constellation Sagittarius, which on this Mazzaroth is the 9th constellation, okay? So I'm zoomed in here. It's kind of blurry, but that's where the sun was. Okay, now the other thing is that Acts 27 and 28 is a ship voyage narrative. Now this upper part of the Sagittarius constellation lines, so if you just forget about this bottom part here, just look at the top part here, it resembles a ship. Okay, so you got like the front mast, rear mast, and the center mast. That's a ship. Now we'll look that it's also supposed to look like a tent, like a 3D tent, if you take away those mast lines. And it symbolizes that in other contexts, in other biblical contexts. But for this Acts 27:28 narrative, it's supposed to be a ship. Okay. Now the sun, when it was at 276 degrees, it happened to be exactly on the center mast, exactly over the center mast of the ship. signaling, so to speak, this ship voyage narrative by being directly centered over these constellation lines that resemble a ship. So that's the first part. Sun at 276 degrees in the ninth constellation. The other part was Acts 28 verse 11, where it talks about the ship having the sign of Castor and Pollux. Castor and Pollux, like I had mentioned, is the constellation Gemini. That's the third constellation on this Mazzaroth, and that's where the moon was at that exact time. So on December 27th and 28th, when the sun was at that particular 276 degrees of ecliptic longitude, and only on those 2 days was the moon, the full moon, in the constellation of Gemini. Okay, so on the 26th, it was not yet in Gemini. On the 29th, it was already gone. Only on 27th and 28th, the full moon was in the third constellation. So that's what the Acts 28 verse 11 is referring to. And the final part is Acts 27 verse 28, where it's mentioning the 25 plus 15 fathoms, which equals 35 fathoms. That's the third part. So Jupiter, the king planet, was at 35 degrees of ecliptic longitude. So that's where that comes into play. In the first constellation, which is Aries the Lamb. Okay. And all of this paints a picture, okay? It's what is this symbolizing? You've got the king planet in the constellation of the Lamb at the top here, and then you've got the third constellation and the ninth constellation. So what it's depicting is the crucifixion. Okay, you've got the king on the cross, or lamb on the cross, sacrifice for the world, and then you've got the third constellation and the ninth constellation representing the third hour to the ninth hour, which Jesus was on the cross. It also symbolizes the fullness of the Gentiles, because the moon was full. I think that's what that symbolizes. Which means that the church is going to be raptured very shortly here. And I think, as I'll explain later, it also depicts, or it's marking the beginning of a defined period of tarry. So that's what this sign is also doing. There's a defined period of tarry that starts at that point at the end of 2023. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. Now, as the sun is after the sign manifests and the sun continues to move like the moon and all the planets in the counterclockwise fashion. So as it's leaving Sagittarius, that's symbolizing Psalms 19 verse 5, which talks about the bridegroom coming out of his chamber and rejoicing as a strong man to run a race. Because, like I said, this is not just a ship, but it's also kind of like a chamber or a tabernacle. So the strong man is the sun. The role is played by the sun here. So when he comes out, it's kind of like the bridegroom coming out of his chamber, as it describes in Psalms 19:5. So let's take a look at a little bit more technical view of this sign. This is a diagram that I made. So this shows the angles a little more clearly. You've got the sun in the ninth constellation at 276 degrees. You've got the moon at 108 degrees in the third constellation. And then you've got Jupiter at 35 degrees in the first constellation. So try to remember these numbers, because they're going to pop up later in the numerics stuff that we look at. But you've got the 276 degrees of the sun, the 108 degrees of the moon, and then you've got the 35 degrees of Jupiter. And the difference, or the distance, if you want to call it, between the sun and the moon is exactly 192 degrees. Or if you take the other side of the ecliptic, it's 168 degrees. And then the distance between the sun and Jupiter was 119 degrees, which is a huge number for the Book of Acts. I've gone over that in previous videos. Sort of the representative number for the Book of Acts is 119. And then on the other side of the ecliptic, if you take the long way, instead of the 119 to Jupiter, you take the 241 degrees on the other side. So 241 is also an important number, because 241 is the Hebrew gematria value of Zerubbabel. And remember, Zerubbabel gets taken in Haggai chapter 2. And this is what this is all about. It's about us being taken. So I guess I can mention real fast about that 119. So yeah, I mentioned in the past this concept of a binary door. So if you look at binary numbers, which are just ones and zeros, so if you just take a 101, that's like a door because you got the ones on either side being the walls, if you will, and then 0 in the middle is the door. 101 in binary is equal to 5 in decimal. And then if you do 2 ones on either side instead of 1 1, that number in binary is 27 in decimal. Now if you do 3 ones on either side with the door in the middle, that number in binary is 119 in decimal. I think that has a lot to do with why 119 is signaled so heavily in the book of Acts, because it's the binary door number. I mean, these are as well. I mean, that's why it's probably in Acts 20, chapter 27, because that's another binary door. But the reason I think it's using 119 more is that that number in binary resembles a menorah. Okay, and so as we'll see later, this sign is also connected to our dedication, which happens 14 days after the sign, or begins 14 days after the sign. And so dedication is what Hanukkah means. So the word Hanukkah actually means dedication. And this number in binary, 119 in binary, looks like a menorah, right? So if you've got like the 3 candles on either side, right? And then you've got the 1 candle in the middle, which is representing Jesus, which is the door, who is the door, I should say. And it's also the 4th candle, and we know that 4 also means door. The Hebrew word for, or letter for 4 is dalet, and it's like a door. So yeah, there's that. Oh, and I'll just mention one little thing real fast. So this is something I hadn't mentioned. I've never mentioned before, but I noticed like the other day. So because I had mentioned in the numeric stuff the 108 degrees in the 3rd constellation. So numerically, it'll pop up sometimes as 1083. 108 degrees in the 3rd constellation. Sort of self-explanatory there. If you apply that same convention to the Jupiter position on the ecliptic, which is 35 degrees in the 1st constellation, you get 351, and that's 153 reversed. And 153, of course, is a well-known number made famous by John chapter 21, verse 11, where it talks about the 153 catch of, or the catch of 153 large fish, which is symbolic of the catch of souls from the church age. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting that if you apply that same convention of the moon's position on the ecliptic and followed by the number of the constellation it is on the Mazzaroth to this one, as you get the, using 35 degrees in the 1st constellation, you get the 351. So what's next? Okay, yeah, if you want to look at this in how it actually looks in Stellarium, which is the astronomy software, this is how it looks. So it's all rotated here. I rotated the whole screenshot so you can to put Aries the Lamb here at the top, so it's in this sort of appropriate position showing the Mazzaroth. And this was about the middle of the night from December 27th going into the 28th. So this is the manifestation of the sign. This is how it appeared in the sky, if you're looking at this bird's eye view. So you have Aries the Lamb, and you got Jupiter here at 35 degrees, and then you have the full moon here in Gemini. That's what these twins are right here. That's constellation Gemini. That was 108 degrees. And down here you have Sagittarius with the sun right there at 276 degrees of ecliptic longitude. Yeah, so that's the sign. And one thing I noticed, I'll add real fast, is that this is something I just saw the other day. So this is new information right here. If you look at where so the sun, or rather Jupiter. Okay, so Jupiter, let me just zoom out a little bit here. Okay, so here's Jupiter at 35 degrees. You probably can't see that, but it gives you the ecliptic longitude value right here in the upper left, and all this text information. But what's interesting that I noticed is that if you go back in time a couple months, there was a partial lunar eclipse. I guess it was like the 28th of October going into the 29th. You can actually kind of see it if you zoom in to the moon. Here, let me just Okay, yeah, you can see it. It's a partial eclipse, so it's only like partially eclipsed there, right, on the bottom. But take a look at where that happened. So I'll click on the moon here. Exactly at 35 degrees. So Jupiter wasn't in that position yet, but it was kind of like, it's kind of like giving you a little signal, like, okay, pay attention to this part of the sky. Something's going to happen here. So God had this eclipse happen at that point of 35 degrees, just 2 months prior to Jupiter being in its correct position when the full sign manifested. I thought that was very interesting. And the other thing is that Jupiter at that time of the year, Jupiter was retrograding. Okay, now retrograding, like I said, most like planets go from right to left along this ecliptic. Every once in a while, they'll do this like U-turn thing and go backwards for a period of time, and then after a few days of going backwards, they'll continue their movement from right to left. Now, that's called retrograde movement. Now, Jupiter was doing that during the time of that lunar eclipse, and let's see, and all the way up to the sign. Okay, so here I'm going into late December, and you can see that it stops moving it stops the retrograde movement at the point where it manifests its position, its role in that sign of being at 35 degrees. So, and then it starts going back into its normal direction. So let me just back up again and show you that. I'll show it from all the way from July. So you can see Jupiter's going in its normal path or direction, I should say, from right to left, and then it turns around. It does its U-turn. It goes into retrograde movement. It's like, oh, I've got to be somewhere, on December 27th going into the 28th. So let me turn around real fast and go there. And here we are. If you're looking at the time here, it's December and then 27th and 8th, right? So it did its thing. It showed up to participate in that sign, and then it starts resuming on its normal direction. So yeah, I thought that was very, very cool. All right. Another thing I saw, which was kind of a coincidence, probably that's not a coincidence, is if you go to the beginning of the 21st century, let's see, January 1st, 2001, this is the beginning of the 21st century, and then you go to the beginning, you go to like 2 or 3 days after that sign manifested, so January 1st, 2024. It happens to be exactly 276 months. So just a couple days after this 276 sign manifests, it's the 276th month of the century. And what's even crazier than that is if you go to Israel's birthday, May 14th, 1948, and then you go to, let's say, that month, like if you go to the exact sign, it's not exact, but if you go to the first day of the official Hanukkah, which was December 7th, 2023, it's exactly 27,600 days. So you've got this big glaring 276 there. So much stuff seems to be pointing squarely at that sign, at its sort of representative number. Another cool thing I found, well, first of all, let me say that another representative number for this sign is 139, because, as you know, it involved the 1st, 3rd, and 9th constellations. So as you look into the numeric stuff, that number keeps popping up a lot, 139. Sometimes it's just 39 or 393, but very often it's including the first constellation, 139 or 931 or something like that. So that being said, I don't know if you guys know what Saros series is, but if you watch Brother Jared's Supernatural by Design YouTube channel, he talks about the Saros series a lot. And what that is every solar eclipse or lunar eclipse falls into sort of a number category. So looking at these eclipses of the 21st century, I guess this starts here at 2001. It lists each eclipse that happens, so far that happened so far this century, and then you see this column here, it says Saros. So like the first eclipse was in the Saros series 127, and then the Saros series 132, the second eclipse was in. And then the third eclipse in 130 was in Saros series 137, and so on. So you can see that they're all categorized this way. Well, it just happens to be the case that this upcoming second great American eclipse, which is on April 8th, happens to be in the Saros series 139. I just noticed that the other day. So that's also pointing to this 276 sign that just happened prior to that. Okay, so, and then another thing I saw was, what was it? Yeah, if you go to the Hamas terror attacks, Hamas. Yeah, the 2023 Hamas-led attack on Israel. Yeah, the number of deaths, Israeli deaths, was, whoops, total of 1,139. And that's a variation, as we've seen in past videos, and I'll probably show in this video as well, of the 139. It keeps popping up a lot, the 1139. So it's not a coincidence. That's also pointing directly at that sign. So that being said, next I'm going to get into some number stuff real fast. So about these dates, I've shown this in the past, but like I said, I want to show some of this stuff for new people. The sign manifested on December 27th. So first of all, if you look at that, at the numbers involved in that date, you've got a 12 and a 27, which reduces to 3 and 9. Right? Because if you do 1 plus 2, that's 3, 2 plus 7 is 9. So that's also pointing to the third and ninth constellation, third and ninth hour. Or you could just add 12 plus 27, and you get 39. Now, if you do the reduction of the other part of the other date, so it's like 12, 27 to 28. Those numbers reduce to 3, 9, and the 2 plus 8 reduces to 10, which reduces to 1, and that's 1. So those are the 3 constellations that were involved in the sign, the 3rd, 9th, and 1st. If you take the full date, 12, 27, 23, and you just do a product, 1 times 2 times 2 times 7 times 2 times 3, you get 168 degrees. And if you recall, I said please try to remember these numbers, but that was 168 degrees separation between the sun and the moon on the shorter side of the ecliptic. Now, if you take the other date, which is 12/28/2023, and you do the product of those numbers, 1 times 2 times 2 times 8 times 2 times 3, you get 192 degrees. Whoops. Oops. Which is, if I can find the picture again, which is the other degrees of separation between the moon and the sun. So it's 168 on this side, 192 on the other side, all baked into these dates. And if you expand the 23 out to the full year, so 12/28/2023, and then you do a product of that, so 1 times 2 times 2 times 8 times 2 times 2 times 3, you get 384 degrees, which is 276 degrees, which is the position of the sun, plus 108 degrees, which was the position of the moon. It's astonishing. Okay, if you then take the verse numbers where this sign is defined, so you look at Acts 27:37. Remember, that's where the 276 comes from. That's the 39th verse from the end of the book. Okay, no coincidence there. The 3rd and 9th constellations. 3rd hour to the 9th hour. It's the 969th verse of the book of Acts, which is signaling Methuselah, as we've talked about in past videos, because remember, Methuselah, his name was given as a sign, because his name means his death shall bring. And when he died, that same year, Noah's flood began. He died at age 969. So that's another thing. That's the flip side of what's being signaled here in this sign. So while it's a good news for the church and for believers, because it's the sign of the coming, it's a sign of this dedication of the temple and the coming rapture and all these good things. But for the world, it's more like the Methuselah. It's more like a sign of the impending judgment, the second judgment, the first judgment being by water, second being by fire. And okay, if you look at from the end of the Bible, it's the 3209th verse from end. Okay, and what do we have there? We've got your 3 to 9, which is the numeric way. 3, 2, 9. Yes, God does things like that. And that number pops up all the time in the numerics if you're looking into this. So that's why it's not an accident that it was the 3209th verse from the end of the Bible. Now, the book of Acts has 1007 verses. Okay, 1007 verses. Can't type today. In Acts. And the sign manifested in Gregorian year 2023, and official Jewish year is 5784. And if you take 223, which is how you represent 2023 in numerics, you usually drop the zeros, and you add it to 784, which represents 5784. You get 1007. So baked into this number here is the years, both Gentile and Jewish, that the sign manifested. Now, if you take that number 1007, number of verses in Acts, and you reverse it, and then in other words, you're subtracting the number from its reverse. So you do 7001 minus 1007. Spread that out a little bit here. You get 5994, which is the current actual year, because the official Jewish year count is exactly 210 years off, because the rabbis tried to hide the Jesus. So it's a long story, but they cut out 210 years out of their year count. But the current actual date is 5994. Sometimes people say AM for Anno Mundi. In my chronology, it's AF for Anno Fall, year of the fall. So that's amazing that's also baked into that number there. Now, if you look at Acts 27:37, which is the verse where it has where it mentions the 276 souls, I see here three numbers. I see a 27 right here, and then here again, and then I got a 37 right here, and then you got the 6. And if you multiply those numbers, 27 times 37 times 6, you get 5994. Current year, anno fall, year of the fall. If you take the date and subtract it from its reverse, so we're talking about the date 12/27, December 27th, and we want to subtract it from its reverse. So 7221 minus 12/27. 7221 minus 12/27. Once again, you get 5994. The year that the sign manifested. Anno fall. As we've mentioned, 4 means the door. It refers to the door, so does so either 1 or 2 4s or 3 4s or whatever. And if you take 444 plus 784, which refers to 5784, you get 1228 for December 28th. And you'll see me doing this a lot, just totally cutting off the 5 on or the first part of years, and that's not arbitrary. The reason I do that is because the way Jewish numbers work is they're grouped in groups of 3 digits, and there's also precedent. If you look at the Purim Fest prophecy from the book of Esther, so like the Esther scroll actually has, like, I don't remember exactly how it works. So it's like 3 numbers kind of stand out, or they're written differently or something, and they are actually a 707, and that's pointing to 5707 of the year 1946, where the Nazi henchmen were being hung. So those henchmen were symbolic of the Haman's henchmen from the story of the book of Esther. So that's a case where God's just using the last 3 of the year, not necessarily including that 5 on the front. So it was just 707, not 5707. You'll see stuff like this all the time. Like I mentioned in past videos, the first instance of the word dedication, which means Hanukkah, in the Bible is actually in Numbers 7, verse 84. So Numbers chapter 7, verse 84. So that's also pointing to 5784. Where's the 5? It's not there, right? It's just, but that's really all. It's all you need. And then you've got the gematria of Methuselah equals 784, which is sort of an ominous sign, I guess, for this current year. Or it's good news if you're a believer, but it's ominous for the world. But that's also, just using the 784, not the 5. That's just some examples there. Anyway, so if you take 127 and subtract 88, which is Jesus, or sometimes it means you can refer to time, because the 88s, if you look at the sun and the moon across a period of 1 year, they make 8s in the sky when they move in the sky. So it's in that way it refers to time, or the movement of time. Anyway, you take 1227 minus 88, you get 1139, which is a variation of the 139 number that can represent that sign, because it's the first, third, and ninth constellations. Reason is, I don't know if this is the reason, but this is a good manifestation of that right here, is if you take, let's see here, if you take 1278, which is a numeric representation of December 27th to 28th, because if you look at that as a number in numerics, you can drop repeating digits, so it's just a 1278, right? 1278. That actually equals 139 plus 1139, uncoincidentally. So it's just the 1139 is kind of just a numeric expansion, if you will, of 139. But there's definitely logic and reasoning behind all of these dates. God didn't just say, oh, pick some random date in December. No, they're all working together numerically. All right. And even the chapter numbers, this is Acts chapters 27 and 28. Well, why is it 27 and 28? Well, Acts 27 to 28 you can represent that numerically as 278. Well, what's 278? That's 139 times 2. So not an accident. It's not. None of this stuff is by accident. And this is kind of a tangent thing, but 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verse 17, pretty famous rapture verse. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Well, that's 1 Thessalonians, so we've got 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verse 17. Now if you subtract from that the 1139, you get 278. Acts 27, 28. If the 278 and subtract it from its reverse, 872 minus 278, you get 594, which is simply a numeric compression of 5994. Current year anno fall, year of the fall. If you take that reversed 278 and you add to it the current official Jewish year, which is 5784, which would just represent here as 784, you get 1656, which is the year anno fall of the flood, when the flood began. Flood year. And if you take, I thought this one was cool. So the number of verses in the Bible is 31,102. If you divide that by 223, which represents the year 2023, it comes to 139. So 2023 and the sign, this 276 sign, which manifested in 2023, are linked at a very deep numeric level. Okay, now if you take a look at, we started looking here at Acts 27 verse 37, because that's where the 276 number is found, and we saw all these great numbers that come out of that. If you look at Acts 28:11, which is where you have Castor and Pollux mentioned. Excuse me. Well, first of all, if you just add them together, 28 plus 11, you get 39. 39th constellations. And if you add together 2811 and its reverse, 1182, let's try it. What's here? So I got a calculator open. 2811 plus 1182, you get 3993. So you got 39 going forwards and backwards, Hebrew style, backwards. So yeah. So I was mentioning that in this sign, the sun and the moon are separated on the longer side of the ecliptic by 192 degrees. Let me just write that out here. And that is, among many other things, pointing to Psalms chapter 19, verse 2. And we can take a look at that real fast. Psalms, 19th verse of the Bible. And chapter 19. Yeah, Psalms 19:2. So it starts with verse 1, it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." And then verse 2 is, "Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge." And we see here this sign where the sun, the sky, the firmament is literally showing us knowledge. because it's giving us all it's giving us this great sign here. If you take that 192 degrees and subtract 39th constellations, you get 153. 153 fish. John 21:11. And if you take, now let me go back to that picture real fast. So the moon is at 108 degrees in this sign, and the sun is at 276 degrees. So if you take 108 degrees divided by 276, you get 0.39. 3rd and 9th constellations. If you take the 192 degrees of separation between the sun and the moon, on the one side of the ecliptic, remember I said, whoops, here's the sun, here's the moon. On this side it's 192 degrees, on this side it's 168 degrees. So if you divide those, 192 divided by 168, you get 1.14, which is Genesis 1:14, which is the verse that mentions lights in the firmament for signs and for seasons, days and years and signs and seasons. And that verse, by the way, its gematria values are 774, and 3744. Right? That's ordinal and standard. So if you take the, because the 276 souls number is found in Acts 27:37. So if you take that 27:37 and you add to it the number of verses in the book of Acts, which is 1007, 27:37 plus 1007, you get the exact gematria value of Genesis 1:14, which is the creation verse describing the lights in the firmament for signs and for seasons. I don't know why I mentioned this. I thought there was something I wanted to show you with that 774, but I can't find it at the moment. Okay, so I guess that's pretty much it for what I wanted to show for numbers. So the other thing about the sign is that I think I had mentioned already, it's basically marking the beginning of a defined period of Teri. So like a Teri period, because everybody was expecting, if anybody who is looking at prophecy, right, or looking at sort of the numbers in the Bible, because you constantly see like 223 hinting at 2023, or just 23 or something like that. Everybody was expecting the rapture to occur in 2023, and when it didn't, everybody was sort of just, at their wits' end. And so this sign is happened right at the end of 2023. It's kind of like it's like the ship dropping the anchor, right? And so they dropped the anchor in 2023, and then when you drop an anchor, you can still float somewhat forward, right? But you can only float so far. So that's the Teri period. Okay, so that's what we're in right now. We're in this tarrying period that extends into the subsequent year. So that's why we're in 2024 here, and we're not in heaven yet. So let's talk about that and why I think that the sign is connected to this period of Teri. So if you look at, let's say, I want to say it's the most famous tarrying verse in the Bible. Maybe it's like in the top 3. I don't know, but it's one of the first ones I think of. So it's Habakkuk 2:3, where it says, though it tarry, wait for it, it shall surely come and not tarry. So that verse happens to be the 393rd verse from the end of the Old Testament. Expand this a little bit here. So right off the bat, we've got this 39 going both ways, right to left, left to right. I call it an emphasized 39. So if you see 393, that's an emphasized 39. So that hints that maybe, considering this verse has to do with tarrying, that it's hinting that sign maybe is related to that. But that's really not enough. If you then look at its Hebrew gematria value, it's 1637 standard. Now, the 1637th prime number just happens to be 13931. And we see some familiar numbers there. It's like a much stronger suggestion, that sign is connected to tarrying. Because that's either, you can look at it like this, it's like a framed 393, or you can just look at it like 139, and then forwards and backwards, right? So it's like a 139 left to right, and then a 139 reversed right to left, Hebrew style. That's a very, very strong suggestion. I mean, it's kind of like screaming it in your face there. All right. Okay, so there's a couple other things here about tarrying. Okay, so if you look up, darn it, the word tarried, because I use this Bible software called Pure King James Bible Search or something like that. And you can search for words and phrases and how often they occur. If you look at tarried, it occurs 32 times in the Bible. 32 occurrences, I'll say. And that's 19 in the Old Testament, and then 13 in the New Testament. We'll come back to that 13. That 13 is significant. But for now, I'll just say, and that's in 27 chapters, okay? But if you look at the actual occurrences, the numbers are interesting. So like the second occurrence actually is Genesis 28:11. Yeah. Yeah, you might have thought I made a mistake there and meant to say Acts 28:11. No, that's Genesis 28:11. So yeah, that's a pretty important verse, as we've seen here. It defines this sign right at the end of the age, and that just happens to be the second occurrence of the word tarried in the Bible. But it gets better. The last two occurrences of that word both happen to be in Acts. And let's see, it's Acts 27:33 and 28:12. So the last two occurrences are in Acts 27 and 28 respectively. What a coincidence. And of these 13 New Testament occurrences, 10 of the 13 happen to be in Acts, the book of Acts. Which is, it's unlikely. I mean, Acts is a very long book. It's a big chunk of the New Testament, but still, I mean, that's probably a little bit less than likely to occur that way, because the Gospels are pretty long too. So you've got the second. So let me just write this down here. Yeah. So the last two. Oops. Acts 27 and 28. Let's see here. Yeah. All right. Okay, so if you just go and read the Gospels and look at every time where it says Jesus tarries or Jesus tarried, okay, you'll find that it's in 5 verses. And I really don't want to type them out, so I'm just going to grab them from my notes. So he tarries in these 5 verses: Matthew 25:5, Luke 2:43, Luke 24:29, John 3:22, and John 4:40. If you add up the verse numbers, right, just the the 5, the 43, and the 29, 22, and 40, they add up to 139. So that's like a home run right there. I mean, that's telling you where all of this is telling you where tarrying is concerned. It is somehow deeply connected to that sign that is represented by the number 139, because it's the first, third, and ninth constellations. So this is why I think that that sign, in addition to the other things that it symbolizes, happens to mark the beginning of a tarrying period. And it's remember, the 276 degrees of ecliptic longitude was where the sun was in the constellation of Sagittarius. I mean, it's the constellation that has the word tarry in it, right? I mean, that's a pretty strong suggestion, I think. Anyway, so let's move on. I want to quickly mention this Enoch calendar, because I get a lot of questions asking me about this calendar, like where I'm getting these dates from. So if you look at this spreadsheet, now this was a spreadsheet that I've been using for the past few videos, and you'll see that I have these columns here. So the Jewish calendar is sort of like the official Jewish calendar date. So if it's Tishri 2 or something, right? That would be what they actually use in Israel. And then the Gregorian calendar that we're all familiar with, right? Calendar date. And then I've got this other, it looks like Jewish date, but it's not the same as what you have in the first column, and I'm calling it Enochian calendar. So I'm getting that from this great brother who runs a channel called Tabernacle of the Bridegroom. He explained how that Enochian calendar works. It's like a kind of, I think it's like a I don't want to say a solar calendar, because it's not totally solar, because we're basing the start of the year on the position of the moon, but it's working with some solar calendar principles. I guess I'll just say it like that. I'm not an expert on it. I kind of got the gist of it and ran with it, and I never really went back and like meditated on it or anything. But it's like the way it works in a nutshell is you basically find like Nisan 1, and then it's just like from there you don't have to look at the moon again until the subsequent year. So the way you do is to find Nisan 1 is you look where the sliver of the new moon is. When the sliver in the new moon is in Aries, that's your Nisan 1. Okay. And then from there it's just like a 30 30 31 30 30 31 system, right? So let's say you start like you find the sliver of the new moon in Aries, and it happens on some date, let's say it just happens to be 4/21/23. Hey, that's actually what it was, right? So, but from there, and so that means like Nisan 1 is 4/21, okay? And then from there, it's like it's just like the first month, Nisan or whatever, that's 30 days. The second month is 30 days, and the third month is 31 days. And then you just keep repeating that pattern of 30, 30, 31, for the rest of the year. That's it. That's it. That's how simple it is, okay? So that's your Nisan. Whoops. What's the next month? I always forget the next one. ER, I think. And that second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth is Elul. Whoops. Elul has 31 days. Tishri has 30 days. Right. And so on and so forth. So that's where that calendar comes from. Okay. So if you use that calendar, now we were looking at the book of Haggai for like the last I don't know, month and a half, because it's got these really great and relevant clues to the rapture timing. And one very standout date in that book is in chapter 2, where it mentions Kislev 24, alternatively the 24th day of the 9th month. Okay, and using this calendar system, because we found that the sliver of the new moon in Aries determined that Nisan 1 was April 21st. Okay, and if you use that as the basis as your Nisan 1, that makes Kislev 24, the 24th day of the 9th month, land on January 11th, right? 2024. 2024. Okay, so that's the first reason we equated January 11th with Kislev 24. But at that point we were still not sure if this is the right way to calculate dates. Now the reason we're still doing that, and we're very, very confident that that's Kislev 24, is because we have a whole bunch of supporting evidence since then that backs it up. And let me explain that real fast. Okay, the first one is, like, there was this okay, so January 11th happened to be like the center point of a massive number of lunar and solar eclipses. Okay, it's just unreal. You can catch that. I think Steve Fletcher covers that. I forgot the other guy's name. He has a Facebook account. I think he was the one who actually discovered that. He covers that as well, and then a bunch of other channels started covering that secondarily. But that date is this like center point. Okay, and if you're looking at lunar eclipses, or actually not lunar eclipses, blood moons, right? Because it's not all lunar eclipses are blood moons. The most recent one happened 429 days prior to January 11th, and then the next one that happens 429 days after. So that is a hint right there. It's the first hint, right? Because 429 is 924 reversed, right? 9th month, 24th day, in other words. So that's the first hint that that's Kislev 24. The next hint was that date is made famous by this book of Haggai, okay? And on that day, January 11th, Israel was had a genocide case brought before it in The Hague. And The Hague is that city where you have the International Court. And in Dutch, because it's in the Netherlands, it's called Den Haag, okay? And then it's a book of Haggai. So that was another little bit of evidence. The next thing that came across was we had this, on that day, on January 11th, this ship here, so Iran seized this, I don't think it was actually an American, it was an American-based oil tanker, okay, in the Oman Sea. So they seized that ship, and it was like all over the news and stuff. Now, the ship is called St. Nicholas. And St. Nicholas Day, now remember, Kislev 24 is the day before Hanukkah, because Hanukkah, per the book of Maccabees, is Kislev 25. That ship was seized on January 11th, what we were considering Kislev 24. And that ship was called St. Nicholas. Now, St. Nicholas Day, the Christian feast day, always happens in 2023 happened the day before Hanukkah. So if you go and look it up on Google, it'll show you it happened. It was celebrated December 6th, and then official Jewish Hanukkah starts December 7th. So you have the ship, called St. Nicholas, representing a holiday that celebrated the day before Hanukkah, on this day that we're considering, Kislev 24, which is the day before Hanukkah, per the book of Maccabees. So that's the third piece of evidence. And so that's a lot, but there's even more, because as we continue to base stuff on this, we found so many more alignments, to the point where now it's not even, I don't even question it. It's so obviously true. So I'll get to those reasons. Those are the reasons are that if you start looking at the other dates that they mention in in Haggai chapter 1 and 2, and mapping them using this Enochian calendar, they all map to significant events on the calendar, on the Gregorian calendar. We'll get to that. Okay, so all right, so what happened on that day? So that day was huge, actually, in terms of, prophetic stuff. First of all, so if you look at this spreadsheet, the 276 sign happened up here, okay? And remember the book, or the chapter 27 mentions the word 14 twice. So there's this like double 14 thing going on there. And 14 days after that sign manifested comes exactly to Kislev 24, January 11th. And then another 14 days, so 28 days, takes you to the 7th day of Sukkot here. If you're new, I haven't really talked about this yet. Why is Sukkot and Hanukkah here? Well, I guess I'll explain that. So what else happened on Kislev 24? Okay, so if you look at, I'll go to Stellarium really fast. If you go back to that date, which was January 11th, and around the evening time frame, Mars, okay, we just back up a little bit here so you can see the movement. So Mars intersects this line here, okay, which is the center mast of the ship, if you will, or it's the bowstring if you just want to look at this as not a ship but just Sagittarius. This line, when things like planets and the sun and the moon cross this line, apparently it's very significant, as you'll see in a moment. But what I think it was also Tabernacle, the bridegroom, was arguing was that when Mars crossed this line, Mars is symbolic of Michael the Archangel, and so that's symbolic of Michael the Archangel cleansing the sanctuary, because this is, in addition to being a ship, remember I mentioned that in other scriptural contexts, it's other things like tabernacle or sanctuary. So when Mars crossed this line, it was cleansing the sanctuary. Now, why do we think that? Because January 11th was exactly 2,300 days after the Revelation 12 sign of 2017, right? September 23rd, 2017. And that number is mentioned in Daniel 13 and 14. Daniel chapter 8, 13, 14. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So that's why he argued, and we believe that Michael the Archangel, symbolized here by the planet Mars, cleansed the sanctuary, so to speak. So the other thing is that date is January 11th is exactly 1335 days after Operation Warp Speed was announced, which was, I think, May something 2020. So very conspicuous here that we've got this this date that aligns perfectly, 1335 days since Operation Warp Speed, 2,300 days from Revelation 12 sign. And let's see. This scenario actually strongly echoes what happened in the book of Maccabees, where the Feast of Tabernacles was delayed due to Antiochus Epiphanes, which was like an Antichrist type, having desecrated the temple. They had to actually delay the feast of Tabernacles. So, because they had to first cleanse the temple. I forget, I think he sacrificed a pig or something like that. So that was why they had to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles late. And so this is echoing that. And, I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on what, therefore, Trump represents and what therefore, this certain medical treatment that was given in 2020 represents. And but apparently that's good news for whoever took it. I mean, I think it is, because if this is something, if this is representing something happening in heaven that cleanses the body of Christ from this desecration or defilement of the temple prior to to its dedication, which I'll get to in a moment. That's good news. I mean, I hope it's good news. It seems like that's what this is. That's the message I'm getting from this. If that medical treatment had desecrated people, then and people are stones of the new temple, right? With Jesus Christ being the chief cornerstone, believers, I should say. Then those people maybe are no longer desecrated, hopefully. Anyway, so I just wanted to point that out. So that was one of the things that happened on January 11th. Okay, so you had Mars coming and cleansing the sanctuary. The other thing is that when Mars crossed that line, which, if you're in the Americas, that was on the 11th, but in Middle East time, that time zone, it was like 2:30 in the morning on the 12th. That was within the same hour of that. United States and Britain launched their attack on Yemen. So to them, Mars is not representing Michael the Archangel. It's the god of war. So when it crossed that line, apparently that was a signal for them to launch that attack. And what we had noticed is in Daniel 10:13, it says, "But the prince of the kingdom of Persia," remember Persia is Iran, withstood me 1 and 20 days, so 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help and remained there with the kings of Persia. So exactly 21 days after that crossing of the line, or that attack by USA and Great Britain on Yemen, exactly, and remember that they're considered Iranian. They always call them Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. Exactly 21 days later was 2nd of February, where and then the United States attacked Iranian-backed militias and assets in Syria and Iraq. Exactly matching the 21 days, of Daniel 10:13, which I thought was amazing. Okay, so I promised I would talk about this whole Sukkot thing here. Okay, so what is this here? So like I mentioned, January 11th, based on all those supporting evidence, we established that to be Kislev 24, which means, per the book of Maccabees, Hanukkah, aka dedication of the temple, would begin on Kislev 25, the next day. So, and what we're doing here is following the template of an extended temple dedication festival, which is defined in 1 Kings chapter 8, I think verses 65 and 66, and 2 Chronicles chapter 7, I think it's like verse 8 through 11 or something like that. They're both describing the same event. But what it's describing is it says that they kept the dedication 7 days and the feast 7 days. Okay, now this was Solomon dedicating the first temple, and he basically kept this. He did this like 7-day dedication just prior to. So it was in Tishri, right? So just prior to Feast of Tabernacles, aka Sukkot. So he did 7 days dedication, and then 7 days of Sukkot, and then he added on an 8th day at the end, okay, where they made a solemn assembly. That's the entire. So this whole 7 plus 7 plus 1 days thing is modeled after Solomon's dedication of the temple. So that's what we're basing that on. That was our dedication as the temple of God. I mean, we are all, as believers, each individual temples of God in micro, but in macro, every believer is a stone. You know, it says, I forget which epistle it was, but we're lively stones, right? Living stones, if you will. We're stones that construct the temple, right? This like living temple, of which Jesus Christ is the cornerstone. So this was the dedication of that temple that occurred back there 14 plus 1 days after January 11th. So that's complete. So we've now been dedicated, and we can be raptured. So I don't think we actually could have been raptured prior to that point, because this process needed to be completed. So another reason I didn't mention why we think that, why we're confident that extended dedication festival should be what should be modeled, or we should model it after that, I should say, is that if you look at the verbiage of that, let me just go to 1 Kings 8. Verse 65. And at that time Solomon held a feast, and all Israel with him, a great congregation, from the entering in of Hamath unto the river of Egypt, before the Lord our God, 7 days and 7 days, even 14 days. On the 8th day he sent people away. Okay, so that's what I was talking about. That's the extended dedication festival. So 7 days of the dedication, or Hanukkah, if you will, and then 7 days of the feast. That was Sukkot, okay, or aka Feast of Tabernacles. And then on the 8th day, the great 8th day, right, he sent the people away. That was our dedication. But it says here, note the wording, it says, from the entering in of Hamath unto the river of Egypt, okay? And we talked about this in I don't know if the last video or the video before last, but the word Hamas in Hebrew means violence. Like if you look it up in Strong's, you'll see that it means violence, okay? So Hamath sounds like Hamas. It sounds like violence, okay? So, and then the river of Egypt we took to mean a sort of like veiled reference to the Red Sea, that area there, this, because the river of Egypt maybe would be better considered like the Nile, but this is kind of like a suggestive thing, I think, from God. It's like maybe like a little hint, because it does look like a waterway. I mean, it is, in a sense, it's the waterway of shipping, and eventually narrows to the Suez Canal. But that, from that point there, because so if you look at this is actually a statement of location, from the entering in of this brook Hamath into the river of Egypt. But I think it's a double entendre here. I think it's supposed to be also from the perspective of this prophetic or spiritual interpretation, not a statement of location, but a statement of time. So from the entering in of violence into the Red Sea, okay, we're looking at it like that. So the point where violence entered the Red Sea, we're regarding as that point where United States and Great Britain launched their attack on Yemen. And yes, I realized there was violence before that, because the Houthis were attacking ships, but this is kind of like a more official arrival or established arrival of violence, is when it's like there's an official declaration of hostilities by this major power, okay? So from the entering in of violence into the Red Sea, that's how I'm reading that. So, and that matches up perfectly if you look at our spreadsheet. So remember, the entering into violence was, very, very early morning on the 12th, which was the first day, the first day of this, of the 7 days of Hanukkah, the 7 days of the dedication, and the first day of the entire kit and caboodle there, right? It's entire 14 plus 1 days. It matches perfectly. You have, because he said he held a feast from the entering in of violence into the Red Sea. That's how we're reading it. 7 days and 7 days, even 14 days, and then plus the 8th day. matching up perfectly. So from the entering into violence, which happened right there on the very, very early morning on the 12th, you have a 7+7 day dedication festival, plus the last day, the 8th day, where they held a solemn assembly. That's why we are very, very confident that we're supposed to be using that extended dedication festival template defined in 1 Kings chapter 8 and 2 Chronicles chapter 7. Anyway, so that's a brief overview. I don't want to get stuck on that, but very cool stuff. So yeah, like I said, we are now dedicated according to that. Now, another picture or diagram, I should say, that I created, this time paper and pencil, and I had put this on a community post, but I don't think I've ever talked about it in a video, was where, and this is where I want to talk about how these dates given in Haggai line up to these so well to these other important dates. So first of all, let's see what we're looking at here. On this top line here is the Gregorian dates, okay? So of the, starting with the first day of the year, which, like, as we've just already mentioned, starts with April 21st, okay? That was Nisan 1. And then this bottom line here is the Enochian dates that correspond exactly to that, right? So these two timelines are running, or these two calendars are running in parallel. So this 1/1 here is not January 1st, obviously, down here, right? That's Nisan 1. And this 6/1 here is not June 1st. That's the first day of the 6th month, or Elul 1. Okay? So between these two calendars, there is exactly a 110-day delta, okay? Or 3 months and 18 days. So whatever that's worth. That's actually going to be a very valuable piece of information that we'll come back to. But if you look at this, these dates, okay, so we already have seen that Haggai chapter 2 gives this date of the 24th day of the 9th month. And we've seen how that lines up with January 11th. And, the sanctuary being cleansed after 2,300 days and 1,335 days after Operation Warp Speed being announced, and, exactly 429 days after the last blood moon eclipse, exactly 429 days before the next blood moon eclipse. Just a whole bunch of stuff. Okay. And then, so after that point, like I said, I mean, I better zoom in here. Might be a little hard to see, but you had the extended dedication festival, 7 days of dedication, 7 days of Sukkot, and then you had this little gap here, which is the last day, is the great 8th day, where they had the solemn assembly. And then on the 26th of January, temple dedication, our dedication, was complete. So a couple of interesting things here. So if you look at, so that was 9/24, 24th day of the 9th month on the Enochian calendar. If you look at the other dates mentioned in the rest of Haggai, it mentions, first of all, it mentions in Haggai 1:1, it mentions the first day of the 6th month. If you map that day to the Gregorian equivalent, that's September 19th. But what was that? That was the Revelation 12 sign, the 2023 version, right? The child asteroid version of the Revelation 12 sign. So that's another, let's say, evidence, right, that suggests that these that we've got this calendar, this Enochian calendar, that this Enochian calendar is correct. I'll just say, because what I mean, it's not just some random date that lands on. That was a pretty significant date. And in the beginning of Haggai chapter 1, it's talking about the command being going out to rebuild the temple. And isn't it interesting then that if you line up looking at these dates here, so if that's the beginning of this whole story here, this command going out to rebuild a temple, and then you look at Haggai 2, what's the subject? They're talking about dedicating the temple. And then what's happening here, the temple is being dedicated. So I believe that at the beginning of September, we had this, or the middle of September, I should say, this in a heavenly way, this command to rebuild the temple goes out, and then it gets built, and then it gets dedicated. It's really a beautiful story because it's all about us, us being dedicated and getting prepared to be raptured and to go to heaven. Okay, and then the other date that's mentioned in Haggai is in Haggai chapter 2, verse 1, and it's the 21st day of the 7th month, or Tishri 21. Now that maps to this peculiar day here that doesn't seem to correspond to anything, which is November 9th, which is a 119. Okay, as we've seen, that's a very, very important number that's relevant to the book of Acts. Well, what I realized later about that is, even though it doesn't map to anything, any event on that day, a lot of other events after that seem to pivot to it precisely. Okay, so it was like exactly 7 weeks after 11/9, or exactly 1 month and 19 days, which is astonishing. There's that number manifesting again, was the 276 time. Okay, and exactly 9 weeks after that date was the January 11th, that pivotal date. Exactly 11 weeks after that was the end of the 14-day part of the extended dedication festival. Okay, and then exactly 12 weeks after that date was 10/14, Tevet 14 on this Enochian calendar. And why that's very interesting is that what happened there is that the moon happened to be... Okay, so the moon on that date was on Virgo's ring finger, exactly like, if you guys remember, back on October 14th, when we had the wedding ring eclipsed. The sun was eclipsed exactly over the ring finger of Virgo. Like, if you look at the artwork in the astronomy software where the hand is, or the hand that's holding the sheaf of grain, that's where the solar eclipse occurred. That's why everybody was calling it the wedding ring eclipse. That happened on October 14th, and then on Tevet 14th, the same imagery happened, except instead of a solar eclipse, it was just the moon, right, showing up there, and right there in the same position over Virgo's ring finger. And what's amazing about that is it's the same date numerically. It's just that during the wedding ring eclipse, it was 10/14, meaning Gregorian October 14th, and on the Tevet 14 manifestation of the moon being there, it was also 10/14, but that was Tevet 14. So that's amazing. Anyway, that's exactly 12 weeks after the 11/9 date here. So you can see a lot of dates seem to be pivoting around that 11/9 date. Okay, and then if you zoom in here, I also show the 21 days of Daniel 10:13, which starts the 12th of January and goes to the 2nd of February. So that was the 12th of January was when you had the attack of United States and Great Britain. They launched the attack on Yemen, and then the 21 days later, on February 2nd, you had United States launching attacks on Iranian-backed assets and militia in Iraq and Syria. So you had that perfect 21 days. I guess the last thing I'll show here is... Okay, so some of the day counts are interesting. So from the first day of the year to the 26th day of the sixth month, which was the date of the wedding ring eclipse, was exactly 177 days, which is an important number because the 177th verse of the Bible is Genesis 7:17, which is the verse where the ark lifts off the earth. So, when God chooses certain dates to do things, everything, like all the connections, like the number of days in the year, or even the numbers that it lands on various calendars, they're all meaningful. Everything has meaning. Nothing's by accident. Nothing he does is by coincidence or anything. Okay, and then on the 10th day of the 9th month of this Enochian calendar was when the 276 sign manifested. Okay, and so that was 252 days. That was it, or I should say, the 252nd day of the year, which brings to mind Proverbs 25:2, which is I can just pull it up fast. Proverbs 25. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. And that was also exactly 8 months and 8 days. I'll just mention that as a side note. So you have your 88 there. Now, I mentioned this a few videos back, but this is also another suggestive evidence that this calendar is correct, because on this calendar, the 24th day of the 9th month, right, which is the day before that Hanukkah begins, is exactly 266 days, which is 38 weeks. So it's exactly 38 weeks, right, to that point, right? And 38 is Hanukkah in Hebrew gematria. So it's exactly 38 weeks to get to where Hanukkah starts, and 38 means Hanukkah. Yeah, this last one here is not too interesting, so I guess I don't really need to talk about that one. Okay, but the thing to remember here mainly is that there's this delta between the Gregorian and the Enochian calendars of 110 days, or 3 months and 18 days. So now we can finally start getting to the new stuff. Okay, so I have this new spreadsheet here. Now, there's a lot of info on here. I couldn't zoom in anymore without losing information off to the sides here or to the bottom. So I apologize in advance if it's hard to see. Maybe I'll zoom in just for the first part of this, as much as I can. All right. So if you watched my last video, you know that we've been trying to use the timeline of the Acts 27-28 ship voyage narrative to see if we can map that over to our current calendar to figure out when the rapture would happen. So we think that the narrative element of that ship voyage that corresponds to the rapture is when Paul sails through that narrow gap between Sicily and Italy. Now we haven't gotten that right yet because we're still here, but we've got a new idea. Brother G44 and Brother Jordan reminded me that there's actually a date mentioned here that you can anchor the timeline to. They reminded me that Day of Atonement is mentioned in Acts chapter 27, specifically Acts 27 verse 9. So that means you can therefore theoretically figure out the exact day that they went through that gap, assuming that you get the timeline correct. You have to figure out exactly what it means when it says they stayed here and then the next day they left, whatever, because there's a lot of room for error, but at least we've got something. So if you look at that verse, it says, "Now when much time was spent and when sailing was now dangerous because the fast was now already past," Paul admonished them. Okay, the fast was now already past. That fast, if you look at the NIV, that just says straight up Day of Atonement, because that's the fast that it's referring to. Okay, Day of Atonement, aka Yom Kippur, which in Leviticus 23 it defines as evening to evening fast, starting on the 9th of Tishri, ending on the 10th of Tishri. Okay, so if it says here the fast is already past, that means they're having this conversation either in the evening of Tishri 10 or in the morning of Tishri 11. Because we know on the next day, Tishri 11, they go ahead and sail. So Paul's telling them they shouldn't sail. They don't listen to him. They sail anyway. Okay. So that means, so Tishri 10, corresponding to 29th of October, 2023, which, by the way, was the day that the partial lunar eclipse occurred. That's the fast day. At the end of that day, in the evening, the fast ended. Okay. Sometime between that and the next morning, they have this conversation. So they leave the next day. That's Tishri 11 on our Enochian calendar here, which corresponds to the 30th of October. That they go ahead and depart. They depart. Fair Havens was the name of the town or whatever that they were at. And it says here, it makes a point to mention the south wind blows in Acts 27:13. Okay. And if you watch my last video, I made a big deal about this 13 that I felt that God was giving me hints about. And I think that and I thought it was referring to the 31st of January, but I'm pretty sure what it is referring to, and I'll get to that. But keep that in mind. You got the 30. That's mentioned that the south wind blows here in Acts 27 verse 13. So that next day, I call this fast day 2, okay? Because obviously the first day of the fast is going to be Yom Kippur. Okay, so if you just keep going, because it says in the narrative, so what happens after that in the narrative is that, the south wind, first it's blowing nice and soft, but then it starts going crazy, and there's this crazy wind called the Euroclydon. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but that's like it just creates like storm conditions, okay? And then for the next couple weeks, they're basically battling this storm, fighting for their lives, okay? They think they're going to die and everything. That happens from the 13th when they left with the south wind, and just keeps going on. And it mentioned it mentions in Acts 27 verse 27 that the 14th night was come. Okay, so that means that everything happening after that point is at night, and they're all getting scared, and they drop the I don't know what they call it, but the thing they use to detect the depth, and that's where you have the 20 fathoms and the 15 fathoms. That's how they discover that they're getting close to land. And they want to bail from the ship because they don't want to, fall upon rocks or whatever. And then it mentions in verse 33, Paul says he suggests that they should eat something because it's the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. So that's your information right there you need, right? So if it's the 14th day, that means that they didn't eat after the fast ended on the evening of Yom Kippur. And that maybe they thought they were going to eat on the ship later that day, on the next day when they actually set sail. But then the storm came, and I guess they were preoccupied with trying to not die. So if that was fast 2, then that's fast day 3, and that's fast day 4, blah, blah, blah. You get all the way down fast day 14. That corresponds to Acts 27:33, where it says, this is the 14th day ye have continued fasting. Okay? Continued fasting from your Yom Kippur Day of Atonement fast, which corresponds to Tishri 23, November 11th. So, continuing on with the story here. So like I said, this was happening at night. And they ended up here, I guess, starting in verse 29. And when it was day. Okay, so that's happening overnight. And then it's at daybreak, at dawn. They didn't recognize the land, but they could see a creek with a shore, and they wanted to just run aground there. And they did that. So that happens in the morning of Tishri 24. Okay, ship runs aground. And if you go to the next chapter, they met the locals there, and they stayed with the guy for 3 days. Okay, so that's a guy named Publius. So it's the same day, because they got there in the morning, and they were all wet and cold, and so they lit a fire for them. That's happening during the day, and then that night they met that day. They met this guy Publius. He's like the guy, I don't know, Publius or Publius, but he's the guy who's the leader or whatever, the chief man of the island. It says here in verse 7. And so they stay with him for 3 days. So that's that first day right there. That same day is the first day, right? Because they stay with him that night, and then they stay with him 3 nights. So that's the second night. That's the third night. Okay. And then the next time information you're given is Acts 28:11. It says, "And after 3 months we departed in a ship of Alexandria, which had wintered in the Isle of Malta." Okay, whose sign was Castor and Pollux. So that's the third day of lodging with Publius or Publius, and then the next time information is after 3 months. So that's Tishri 26. Then you got to go 3 months forward. Okay, so now you're going. That's 7/26, right? Tishri 26. You got to go to 10/26. Go to Tevet 26, which corresponds to the 13th of February. Because it says in Acts 28, after 3 months, they landed at Syracuse, tarrying there 3 days. So after 3 months, they landed at Syracuse, tarrying there 3 days. So that means the first day of Syracuse tering was Tevet 26, the day they arrived. The second day was Tevet 27, the second day of tering. The third day of tering was Tevet 28. And then okay, that's the third day of tering. Okay, so that means the next day they left. And that's Acts 28, verse 13. No, I'm sorry. No, that is it. Acts 28, verse 13. There's a whole lot of information in that one verse. They fetched a compass and came to Rhegium. So they left Syracuse and in the morning, I presume, and they sailed to Rhegium, which is probably just like an hour or two because it's really close of a sail. Let's see here. Yeah, and then it says in 13, after one day the south wind blew, and they sailed with the south wind. So that means that they couldn't have, sailed with the south wind that day if it says after one day. So they had to have a row here that says one day at Rhegium, okay? And then the next day is the day they sailed. So the south wind blew on Tevet 30. Okay, so that's corresponds to February 17th. That's the day when they go with the south wind, which is another 13 there. That's Acts 28:13. So the south wind blows twice. It blows in verse 13 in each respective chapter. All right, so that's the narrative. Now let's go over some of the cool stuff here. Okay, so the first thing that I noticed was that this entire narrative starts on Yom Kippur, which is Tishri 10. And that happens to be the 192nd day of the Enochian year. So, and if you recall, that 192 is the degrees of separation between the sun and the moon during the 276 sign. So not only is that a nice manifestation of the properties of that sign into this narrative, it's also a nice hint that maybe we are on track with this this current timeline mapping. Another thing I noticed was that if you watched the last video, you saw that the way we mapped the timeline to the current day, the Syracuse Terry ended up landing, on January 27th and 28th, which was and we were very encouraged by the fact that there's this minor Jewish feast day on January 28th called Purim Saragossa. And because Saragossa means Syracuse. So we thought that was an encouraging hint that let us know that we're on the right track. But we were not on the right track. But nevertheless, it's interesting that Purim Saragossa, which is celebrated on January 28th, right, which is a 128, could actually be could still correspond to the way we're mapping the timeline now, because the Syracuse day also lands now on a 128 date. It lands like the day 3 of the Terry lands on Tevet 28, which is 10/28 like that, right? But you drop the 0, so that would be 128. So it could still be applicable somehow. Now, the next thing I noticed is very interesting. So the south wind blows in this narrative in twice, okay? So it's blowing in Acts 27, verse 13, and Acts 28, verse 13. The first time it blows is when they're leaving Fair Havens at the beginning of the voyage, okay? That happens on the 303rd Gregorian day of the year. And the second time it blows is when Paul's going through that gap, right, the Strait of Messina. And that happens on the 303rd Enochian day of the year. So it's like the same day of the year, but on different calendars. One's the 303rd day of the Gregorian calendar. One's the 303rd day of the Enochian calendar. I thought that was very interesting. And what's even more interesting is that, okay, so the first time the south wind blows on the 303rd Gregorian day of the year, that corresponds to October 30th, which is a 1-3 date, right? Because if you look at it, 10/30, that's just which was, you just drop the zeros, and that gives you a 1-3. So it's the south wind blows in verse 13, and that seems to map perfectly to the Gregorian date of 1030, which is a 13. And then the next time the south wind blows, also in verse 13, you also have a 1030, which is a 13, but this time it's the Enochian date that gives you the 1013, or it gives you the 13 rather. So isn't that interesting? And then I realized that this is okay. So the second time the south wind blows, that's the 48th Gregorian day of the year, right? Because that's February 17th. And on that day, 318 days remained. And it also happens to be the 110th day since the start of the voyage, or 3 months and 18 days. And then I realized, hey, I've seen those numbers before. That's the exact delta between the Gregorian and Enochian calendar. So the duration of this Acts ship voyage, the Acts ship voyage lasts exactly as long as the difference between the Gregorian and Enochian calendar in this year, 2023 going into 2024. That's amazing. That was a huge discovery. So, and it's also amazing that, I mean, this is just one of these alignments here that I don't know where to put. It's just amazing that also that on that day of the year, the Gregorian calendar of February 17th, there happens to be 318 days remaining in the year, which corresponds to the 3 months and 18 days that have passed since the start of this voyage, of this ship voyage. That's huge. And then on that day just happens to be February 17th, 4 months and 29 days since the Revelation 12 sign on 9/19. Back here, right? Which corresponds to the Haggai chapter 1, verse 1. Now, we've seen that before as well, because that's just 924 backwards, right? We saw that on the other spreadsheet. 429 is 924 reversed, okay? Which points to Kislev 24. There's something about the way this mapping lines up with the calendar that just seems to click into place. I don't know how to describe it, because so many significant numbers seem to be coming out of this. Exactly when the south wind blows the second time, in other words, exactly at the end of this voyage, happens to be 4 months, 29 days since the Revelation 12 sign, child asteroid, which is a 429, which is, like a reverse 924. It's exactly, the whole ship voyage is exactly 110 days long, or 3 months and 18 days, which is the exact delta between the Enochian and the Gregorian calendar. It's just mind-blowing. By the way, in case you're wondering why these comments here seem to be, or these cells here seem to be in a very, very light font, that's because that's just sort of notes for myself, and I didn't really want to get into these things in the video, because some of them are just too complicated to explain. Yeah, okay, so another thing I noticed was that, let me just try to maybe zoom out a little bit here, because now I'm getting into some of the other information. So there are two Greek words for teri, okay? That's Strong's Greek 3195 and Strong's Greek 1961, okay? And the first one has 110 occurrences, and the second one has 17 occurrences. Well, that's just, maybe it's a coincidence, but this is a voyage that that lasts exactly 110 days and ends on the 17th of February. 110 occurrences and 17 occurrences for a 110-day voyage ending on the 17th of the month. Could be a coincidence, but it's pretty interesting anyway. So the next thing I noticed was that, and I pointed this out in the last video, but that Strong's that word for south wind, like if you look it up in Strong's, the occurrences, it occurs 7 times in the Bible, seem to strongly signal the number 13. Okay, because well, for example, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it here. It's in Matthew 12:42, Luke 11:31, which is 13 backwards, Luke 12:55, Luke 13:29, Acts 27:13, Acts 28:13, Revelation 21:13. So out of 7, you've got 5 of them have 13. And even in the cases where you don't have a 13, it always has a 12, which is like a 3, right? So like 2 plus 1 is 3. Maybe nothing. I just thought it was worth mentioning because I mentioned that last time, that south wind word itself seems to be associated with the number 13, in addition to all the other stuff, like the verse numbers of the south wind, both happening on verse number 13. Okay, so the next thing is, if you look in, now we're also looking a lot obviously in Haggai chapter 2, and in Haggai chapter 2 verse 16, there is a riddle posed. At least I see it as a riddle. It says, let me just fix that quote. It says, "Since those days were when one came to a heap of 20 measures, there were but 10. When one came to the press fat for to draw out 50 vessels out of the press, there were but 20. Okay, so we've got a 20 and a 10, and a 50 and a 20. So if you do the 20 minus 10, you get 10. And if you do the 50 minus 20, you get 30, which gives you 1030, which is Tevet 30. I just thought I thought that was pretty interesting. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe we're interpreting it wrong, but it's sure interesting that seems to match. And another 13 that I found, which I mentioned in the last video, but I'll mention it again, is I look up. So I noticed that Yemen was in the news so much, and I was thinking that reminded me of ye men, the phrase ye men, which is found in the Bible here and there. It's like ye men of Galilee or whatnot. And if you look in the King James Version of the Bible, ye men, that phrase is actually found 13 times. So it's for 13 occurrences. Okay. So there's our 13 again, potentially pointing to Tevet 30. But 8 of those occurrences happen to be in the book of Acts. Which is interesting, right? Because Acts has this ship voyage narrative. It's like, about ships and stuff. And all this stuff happening in Yemen has to do with shipping. So I just thought that was quite the coincidence. And the next thing is, so when the south wind blows the second time, it takes Paul through that narrow gap between Sicily and Italy. And I didn't know it last time I made a video, but that gap is called the Strait of Messina. And somebody left me a really good comment on my last video explaining to me more about that town or that city. But first, let me just show you the gap real fast. So this is that area there. So here's Syracuse. Paul sailed from Syracuse to Rhegium, right? And then the next day they sailed through this gap. I guess this stupid pin here is covering it up, but it's a really narrow gap there between Sicily on the left and the boot of Italy here on the right. And I guess it used to be called Messana. Rhegium also has a different name. That's like Reggio or something. But anyway, so yeah, close that real fast. So that Strait of Messina, if you look at, if you go to Wikipedia, it tells you the origin of that. Well, what that city used to be called. It was originally a Greek city called Zankla or Zankli or something, which means scythe because of the shape of its natural harbor. Wow, isn't that interesting? So if that corresponds to the rapture, which, like we suspect, isn't it interesting that strait that it's named after, means scythe, which has to do with a harvest, that you harvest crops with a scythe, and I guess they said it's because the harbor looks like a scythe. And that's a aerial shot of the harbor, and it does, doesn't it? And another thing that another commenter pointed out, because we were talking about that gap between Sicily and Italy, the Strait of Messina, we were likening it to the gate to heaven, because if the rapture happens on that day, it does look like it's when you sail through that and you look at the map, it looks like you're passing through a gate to heaven. Well, the commenter pointed out, which I thought was a brilliant comment, Matthew 7:14, where it says, because straight is the gate and narrow is the way, and straight has got this peculiar spelling there, this old English spelling of strait, which brings to mind, in modern English, it brings to mind straight in the sense of a waterway strait. I think it's a nice little wink from our Father in heaven there. And another thing is, if you look at Strait of Messina in Wikipedia, you'll find that at its narrowest point, it's exactly 3.1 kilometers wide. Another 13 there reversed, pointing to potentially Tibet 30, which is a 1-3. And I think I saw something right before I clicked into this article here on the Messina article. Yeah, there he is. Wow. Look at that. Messina happens to be the 13th largest city in Italy. What another coincidence that's not a coincidence. Another thing potentially added to our pile of 13s. All right. So I think that's it. That's where we are now. We've got this narrative, the ship narrative, I think properly mapped now. I think that why am I not zooming here? There we go. I think that the fact that the discovery that this entire voyage lasts 110 days or 3 months, 18 days, which is the exact delta between the Enochian and the Gregorian calendars, that's huge to me. I mean, I've been looking at that delta here, for a couple weeks, wondering what those numbers mean, right? There has to be some kind of meaning there. It's not just this random difference, and if it is, that's sad, but that the entire Acts ship voyage happens to last that exact period of time, that's God's precision right there. So yeah, hopefully we have it right this time, and that's pointing to Tibet 30, which is February 17th, as I'm looking at this, there was one thing I forgot to mention earlier. So the day after the crossing of the Strait of Messina is Shavat 1 on the Enochian calendar, which is 11/1, because Shavat is the 11th month. And that also happens to be the 111th day since the beginning of the Acts ship voyage. So the 111th day since the beginning of the Acts ship voyage lands on a date which is a 111. That's amazing. Yeah, I find little things all the time when I'm looking at this, which gives me confidence that the Acts ship voyage is correctly aligned to the Enochian calendar and to the Gregorian calendar, amazingly. It tells me that everything's in alignment, because little things like that just will click into place. So yeah, it's just like how there was the on this day here, the crossing, that's exactly 4 months and 29 days since 9/19/23, which is the Revelation 12 sign, and that variations of that 924, 429, 249, stuff like that keep popping up in this alignment, because apparently this Gregorian to Enochian calendar is some sort of mechanism, and that date seems to be some kind of pivot point. I don't quite understand it yet. I might not be smart enough to ever understand it, at least as a human body with a human brain, but that also tells me if this rapture, potential rapture date here lines up that way with that number, 4 months 29 days, which is the 429, which is the 924 reverse, the case love 24. That's another one example of something clicking, where you feel like, oh wow, this is all correctly aligned. Anyway, so that's the date that we're looking at potentially being raptured out of here. That's Tevet 30 on the Enochian calendar, which corresponds to the 17th of February. So I don't know if I had to guess just here right now, I'll just say it would be a February 17th to 18th phenomenon, depending on where you are in the world. So, but this is just a guess. It's just my best guess. There are no guarantees. Yeah, so I guess I'll just leave it there today, and thank you for sticking it out to the end of the video. Hope you guys were blessed by it. Hope you liked it. And yeah, I look forward to reading some interesting comments. I love the comments you guys leave. So yeah, thanks again. God bless.